What's up, guys? So in this video, we're just going to be going over what are inverse fair value gaps. This is going to be a pretty short and honestly self-explanatory video, just basing on the fact that we have already went over what normal fair value gaps are, and the fact that if we have a bearish fair value gap, we're expecting it to send price to the downside, and if we have a bullish fair value gap, we would expect it to send price to the upside. All that stuff, all explained, all self-explanatory now. So the best way, or the most simple way that I can explain what an inverse fair value gap to you is say, for example, in this example right here, we have this bearish fair value gap. If we are in a bearish market, we would expect this fair value gap to send price to the downside, right? Say we get rid of this candle, we would expect price to go to the downside after tapping into this bearish fair value gap if we are in a bearish market. So if this doesn't happen and we don't end up getting sold off to the downside and we end up closing above this fair value gap, what this means is that we failed to send price lower, and the same bearish fair value gap that failed to send price lower will now most likely try to send price higher. So now in this example, we have this high to the left that formed this fair value gap. Once we close above this bearish fair value gap, I would expect that this next high that formed the fair value gap will be the draw on liquidity, or where I expect price to go. So obviously I don't have another candle drawn right now, but in a perfect situation, it would look like this, and we would come take out that high, right? So all an inverse fair value gap is essentially the opposite side you are expecting to be respected if we didn't respect it on the other side. So that was a lot right there. But if we have a bearish fair value gap and we don't respect it and we disrespect it, now we would expect this bearish fair value gap to hold bullish and send price to the upside. You just have to let it kind of stick within your brain that if we are disrespecting one side, we're probably going to respect the other side. So since we disrespected the bearish side, we're probably going to respect the bullish side and go up to this high. So just off of this example, that's what a inverse fair value gap is. This would be an example of a bearish fair value gap getting turned into a bullish inverse fair value gap. So just to show you a little bit more examples, I'll get rid of this and we can go on to the chart and actually show it. So if we go down to the bottom of, this price range right here, we can see that price was continuing to go down and down and down, right? And then right around here in price, we formed this bearish fair value gap. If I change the tool up a little bit, we formed this bearish fair value gap right here. Now, if we're looking at price action right here, we have this high that formed this fair value gap. And if we are in a bearish market, right, if we're selling off, we would expect this to send price to the downside, right? If price doesn't do that and we end up coming above this fair value gap and closing above it, I would expect this high that formed the fair value gap to be the next draw on liquidity. Now, mind you, it could be all of this liquidity. We could go and search for all of this liquidity. It doesn't have to just be this high. But once we are invalidating a bearish PD array or a bearish confluence, this is now an inverse fair value gap. So this, instead of being a bearish inverse fair value gap, this is now a bearish fair value gap. This is now a bullish inverse fair value gap because we inversed the bearish orders that were sitting within here. So if I just kept letting price go, obviously we keep running past this high, right? So now, if I even look over to the left, what do we have? Another bearish fair value gap right here. Once price comes up and we disrespect this fair value gap and we close above it, this is an indication that price could want to come and take out this high, because this is the high that formed this bearish fair value gap. And if we're not going to hold bearish from it, and we're not rejecting back to the downside, we could expect this to be the next draw on liquidity. So if I were to keep letting price go, obviously we invalidate this for value gap, and then we come up to this high. Now, if I look even further to the left, we have another fair value gap right here. If we invalidate this fair value gap, and we invalidate this one right above it, what would I expect? I would expect this high to be the draw on liquidity. I would expect us to come up to either one of these highs. So I don't know what happened here. Okay, so we invalidated this first one. We're about to invalidate the second one. See if we do. All right, so now we closed above both of these bullish or bearish for value gaps right here. We closed above both of them. So now, instead of them expecting them to send price to the downside, we can probably expect one of these highs, at least one of them, will most likely get taken out. We took out the first one, and we took out the second one. So, one thing I actually want you to note here, when we closed above this bearish for value gap right here, right, with these candles, what did we also form? If I just get rid of these for the time being, what did we also form? Bullish fair value gaps. So we can clearly see that we were disrespecting the bearish PD arrays. We were disrespecting the bearish side of price, and we were closing above it. And we were creating new bullish PD arrays that we were respecting. We were actually rejecting off of these. Compared to these ones, we were just going straight past them. So the way that you can use this to your advantage is you could say, okay, we have this bearish for value gap. If we respect this bearish for value gap, I would expect to send price to the downside. But if we invalidate this for value gap, I can expect price to go higher in the same way that it did. We invalidated them, we formed bullish PD arrays, and then we came up to these highs. What did we also do? Formed more bullish PD arrays. Now mind you, right here, this bullish for value gap, this got closed under. And we never took out this high, or this low, I'm sorry. We never took out this low after we closed underneath this bullish for value gap, right? So it's not always going to play out, but there's reasoning to why it did not play out, right? Because we closed underneath this bullish for value gap, but what did we have right to the left of it? We had an order block. And obviously, I will teach this later in the course, but right here, the reason why we didn't come down to this low is because we had this bullish order block right here that sent price higher. So even though we invalidated this bullish PD array, we had another PD array to send it higher and keep going. So like I said, it's not always going to play out 100% of the time, but that's just how you would use the concept. An inverse fair value gap is just a fair value gap that is getting closed above and used to send price in the opposite direction. So like I said, if I just wanted to draw up the bearish examples right here, we had this bearish for value gap down here. This got invalidated and it got closed above. We had this bearish for value gap right here. It got invalidated and it got closed above. We have all of these. I can show you infinite examples of these for value gaps. You'll see them obviously for yourself live in time. They are literally everywhere and you'll always see it. And the most important part, I would say, of an inverse fair value gap is having the actual reasoning to take a trade based on that fair value gap. So, like I said, they're everywhere. So if you take a trade off of every single one, it most likely won't work out the best for you. But if you use other confluences, like if we swept out liquidity right here, and then we come and we invalidate this bearish fair value gap, then maybe this could be an opportunity for you to take price to the upside. It's just all about using the other confluences and the other narratives that you have to support this trade idea or support these concepts being used within a trade. So that's what inverse fair value gaps are. Like I said, very simple. It's just, I don't actually have the diagram up anymore, but it's just If you have a bearish one and it fails to hold, then we would expect price to go higher. If you have a bullish fair value gap and it does not hold, then we would expect price to go lower. So just as an example, price did not go lower right here, but in a perfect situation, if I was looking at price and we did this and we closed underneath this bullish fair value gap, we could possibly expect price to get sent down lower to this low because we are invalidating the bullish PD array that we formed. So that's what inverses are. I hope that covered it. I hope that helped you. And obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.